Hey guys, it's Chris from the Classical Guitar Blog. I wanted to talk a little bit about nails today. So first things first, we're going to talk a little bit about supplies that you need to do your nails as a classical guitarist. The first thing is a file. I use one of these guys. It's a diamond file, right? You can also use a glass nail file. The thing that you don't want to use are those weird, it's like a metal file with just the lines in it. You find them on like fingernail clippers and stuff like that. Don't use those things, right? They're a little bit too rough. They kind of chew up the tip of your nail and it makes it really hard to smooth them out again as well. So diamond file, glass file, first crucial part. And then you need some sandpaper, or I use micro mesh, which is this stuff, right? And this is just like sandpaper on steroids, apparently. Costs a couple bucks at places like Strings by Mail. And that's really it, right? So sandpaper, good nail file, good to go. Sometimes when you get your file or your sandpaper, they're going to be too rough. They'll take off too much nail edge, just not good. Makes it really kind of hard to work with. If that's the case, you can just take the nail file and you can rub it along some concrete or cement, right? Just rub it along it, and that'll knock some of the edge off of it. And you can actually do the same thing with sandpaper. You just need to rub it against itself, right? So even the really high grit sandpapers, like 6,000 or 8,000 grit sandpapers, are going to be maybe a little bit too rough for smoothing out the edges of nails. So you can just take them and rub it along itself. So I did quite a bit of experimenting when I was just starting classical guitar with nail shape. And you know, I read a ton on it. Charles Duncan's book had some stuff in it, Scott Tennant's book, and there was a time where I did my nails super short, really steep ramps, kind of like the Scott Tennant method or whatever. And eventually I found a nail shape that I settled into, and it was only a couple of months ago that I realized that I was following pretty much the first piece of advice I ever got about fingernails, which was just, instead of really worrying about a different shape, just follow the shape of your fingertip. So if you look at, for instance, my index finger, you can see that the nail shape just sort of follows what the fingertip does. And that's it, right? That's worked really well for me. I can't do anything but recommend it. It won't work for some other people. There's a link in the video notes to an open thread for people that have nail problems and stuff like that. A lot of my commenters posted some advice about hook nails and brittle nails and thin nails and things like that as well. At the very least, starting out with a nail shape that follows your fingertip will give you a good starting point for experimenting. As far as length, I don't think you need it to be crazy long. My nails are actually pretty long right now. So some of them actually need to be longer than others for me. My A fingernail needs to be a little bit longer to work well. So I don't think that you need to go too long. I don't think you need to go too short either. I think if you're just starting to do this, or if you've been at it for a while and your nail shapes are kind of frustrating you, a good guide is to use kind of what Scott Tennant said and just try not to go any farther than your fingertip. So try to keep the edge of the nail, right, even with your fingertip. The final thing we're going to talk about is how to put a really good smooth edge in your nail. So this part is really, really crucial. That's how we get a good sound. If you've ever ran your fingers along strings and they kind of have a scratchy sound, that's the result of having not a smooth edge on your nail, right? It just scratches up the strings, it makes your tone bad, no good, right? So I have a 3-step method that I use for this. The first thing is we're just going to take our file, right? And this is after we've done our nail shape, right? Everything is good with our basic shape, it's all fine, right? So the first step after we have our shape down is we're going to take the file and go at a 45-degree angle to the nail, and you can see that I'm not way far underneath of it, I'm not over top, I'm not straight on, 45-degree angle underneath the nail, and we're just going to knock some of that nail off, right? So we're not really shortening it, it just takes a couple strokes, you saw how little I just did there, right? And this actually puts kind of like a point on the fingertip of your nail like that, right? So after that, we're going to knock the top edge of the point off by taking our file like this and just going over top of the nail. Now when you do this step, it's really easy to take off a lot more than you need, and maybe even just knock off another millimeter or something like that. So be really careful. You can see how very little of that I did, right? And I have pretty thick nails here, so it does not take a lot. So what we've done with these first 2 steps is actually put a point on the fingertip. Now something that people kind of get a little bit confused about is they think that we want, instead of when we take our sandpaper and stuff like that, they think we want to just smooth the edge of the nail, the very tip part that we see, because that's the only part that contacts the string. But what I've found is that we kind of want to get the whole tip of the nail rounded and edge really smooth, right? By putting the point on the fingertip with the first two steps, it gives us a head start of rounding the entire tip of the nail off, right? So after that's done, we're gonna take our sandpaper. I'm starting with a really, really rough grit of micro mesh, right, 3200. And what I'll do is use the same thing that I'm gonna talk about I'm doing with this and work up through different grits. So I use 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, and then 12,000 grit, right? And it doesn't take very long. I mean, that seems like a lot, but it's not a ton of time. So the first thing I like to do with this is I'm gonna take it and just run it underneath my nail. And usually what happens for me anyway is that I get kind of like some buildup or some leftover debris from the filing process that kind of needs to get cleaned up in there. So after I've done that, and again it's just rubbing underneath like that, I'm going to take the micro mesh. This is just a foam block. I'm going to wrap it around the foam block, and then the real kind of smoothing process begins. Now when you do this, right, even if you're not using a block or you're just using sandpaper or something like that, or even if it's not micro mesh at all, right, when we do this, a lot of people are just going to stay to this, right? The very tip of the nail, back and forth, done, move on, right? We actually want to try to get it at different angles. So I'm going to even try to get underneath the nail, get that part smooth, on top of the nail, right on it, and on the very top edge of the nail as well. So that's it with this grade, right? And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm moving up to 4,000. I'm going to do the same thing with this grit, right? Along straight on, underneath, on the top, all that stuff, right? So again, first step for putting the edge on, 45-degree angle with the file, right? Just like that. After you've knocked off a little bit of nail, you're going to run it over the top, which basically puts a point on your nail. Then we're going to take the micro mesh or sandpaper, knock any debris off that you might have accumulated, and then start smoothing. And when we smooth, we really want to make sure that we're going to get every side, right? Thanks.